Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 143 of Retro Power Uncut. And we're here in the fabrication department, and we're going to start with a little bit of the Churchill two-door Mark II Jag Coupe project, which Tom has just picked up, continuing with some work on. As I say, Stu's still away at the moment. So Tom's just making a start on some of the metal finishing on this. We know we've got a lot of work to do in terms of the final shape and the metal finishing on the quarter panels and on the doors. So Tom's made a start on that side. He's had the door off the car and been doing some planishing work on that because the crown had just sunk in slightly on both of those doors. They're a very low crown panel, and the amount of tension in the panel to keep that very slight crown is pretty critical. And during the clinching on process, some of the tension had gone, which is why the doors had become too flat, if not very slightly concave in the centre. So Tom's just taken the door off and then just used a slapper and dolly just to put some, just to stretch the surface of the skin very, very slightly, at the same time taking out any of the tracking lines from the English wheels left in them. So it's a smoothing process as well, but in doing that, that just squeezes the panel slightly, stretches it a shade, and that puts a bit more tension into it and gets the shape back to where it should be. And then in conjunction with doing that work, he's also just adjusted the radius along the top a little bit, and also working on the quarter panel now, altering the radius at the top of the quarter so that it correctly matches the door and flows into the wing, because there was a slight adjustment needed there. And also putting some shrink into the centre of the quarter panel, because the crown is slightly the reverse of the door really. The crown had gone slightly too high in the centre of the quarter panel. So there's a little bit of work going on there, some adjustment going on there, and then a little bit of blending into the wheel arch as well, because there's a couple of areas there which need a bit of work. So that's what's occurring with that, metal finishing. And unfortunately, that's probably going to sound like a cracked record for the next number of weeks, because there's a lot of metal finishing to do on this body shell. So it's an awful lot of hammer and dolly, slapper and dolly, and everybody wearing ear defenders and getting cheesed off with lots of hammering, basically. So that's where we're on with that. Moving along, next in line, it's moved round. I'm just trying to remember, I've lost track. I think in last week's episode, was this actually rolling? Or were we getting it rolling?
Just rolling.
I think we just got this rolling last week. Well, that's right. We got it rolling, but we didn't have wheel arch clearance. I then made some tubular spacers to stick onto the original Honda dampers to set them somewhere approximating to mid-travel. Slightly different one end of the car to the other. It appears that a Honda Integra actually sits at a different point within its suspension travel at the front to the back. So I've done that to make the car sit level. As I say, it does then sit slightly further through its bump travel at one end than the other, but that is what it is. So those tubes are now fitted to the dampers. The car is sitting at the proposed ride height. We then trimmed I'll show you on this front wing, trimmed the wings out to get wheel clearance concentric to the wheel centre at ride height, so that we could then get the car sat at ride height with wheel clearance, so that George and Luke and Tarks could all get it scanned. So they've got that done, mainly Luke and Tarks. George doing a bit of supervision to make sure they didn't go too far off track with that. So they've now got the scan data of the finished car in inverted commas, at ride height, with its wheels on, at the correct position in terms of the outer face of the wheel and rim. As I say, these have been spaced so that they match the outer position of the new wheels when we get when we get the actual wheels that are going on the car. So they've got the scan of all that lot, so then George knows exactly where he's got to put the bodywork to clear those wheels. And then Bobby's then removed the outer wings and is working on the fabrication of the front of the inner wings. He's now actually moved on to something else, which we'll get onto in a sec. But he'll be coming back to this. He's fabricating the front sections of the inner wings, these pieces, which will form the new front sections of the inner wing, which then turn out to the outer wing and form a splash shield as well at the front. Bear in mind, the new outer wings will be carbon fibre. The tooling for those carbon fibre panels will be direct machined from CAD data, which is what George is working on now in the background, is the CAD drawings for the rear wings and the front wings. We'll get those made, and then The bonnet and boot lid will be moulded from the original panels, also in carbon fibre, and then we have the side skirts and the front spoiler to make, which will be made. The drawings for those will be done once we've got the wings on, the carbon wings on, because risking the joint between the wings and the steel body, front and rear, and the side skirt between those carbon panels and the steel body as well. There's quite a big stack up of tolerances, too many things that can go wrong there. So we're going to do the wings first, then rescan and remeasure to do the side skirts and the spoiler, because they're parts that join onto carbon parts. So there's 2 stages to all of that. So George is in the background working on the CAD for the wings. Bobby's doing the inner wings at the front, and then Scott, lastly on this car, is working on the back. He's not quite in yet, because we're actually, it's actually 8 o'clock on Thursday morning when we're videoing this week, because Jamie is not here on Friday, so he's getting the video done today. So we're slightly earlier than we normally are, and so Scott will be here any second. But he's working on the back on the C-pillar reinforcers, which tie the bottom of the C-pillars down onto the top of the rear wheel arches. At the moment we've got a temporary brace fitted to the Integra rear seat mounts, and that ties the inner quarter panels to those, and then we've got the rear of the boot floor, which is tying the back panel of the Allegro onto the modified Integra boot floor. But we need a bit in between those two, because the rear seat brace piece is only temporary, that'll be coming out. The bottoms of the C-pillars need to be tied onto the top of the inner rear wheel arches on the Integra. Those are currently being fabricated by Scott. He's done the first stage, which is the channel section. He's got to do the channel section this side, and then he's making the flat sheet sections that will sheet in the bottom of the inner C-pillar, inner quarter sort of joint point down to the inner wheel arch and form a complete structure there. So that's what Scott's on with. At that point, once the inner wings are done, and then the inner wing reinforcer sections, which have got to come down here and tie over the top of all of this and right down and onto these front sections, are done. And then we're putting a tube along the top. We're going to roll an oval tube section down here, which will carry the outer wing, and that'll be boxed into the top of the original Integra inner wing down here, which will add a lot more strength again. Once that's all done, we're going to start on the dry build, as we would call it in inverted commas, because the fundamental structural fabrication will largely be done. The other thing we've got to do is remove I've skipped over something there. The other thing we've got to do is remove the rear quarter panels so that we can get at the inner structure to finish off the very rear part of the sill that we couldn't access. And also now we've got the scan data, the quarters can come off, so George can get a final scan of the shape of the return sections for the flanges on the carbon rear quarters. So we can do that as well. But at that point, we're going to then do dry build. We will drop in the engine and gearbox with ancillaries into the engine bay so that we can start working on making space for things. It should be fairly straightforward, as the bulk of it is going to be Honda. The only complications are that we've lost a bit of radiator space versus the Honda with the Allegro front end. So there's a few little minor complications there. The other point of interest in here is that, we don't know whether we've mentioned before, but we are actually building 2 of these. And the strip down has started on the second one, and we now have a second Integra on site, which is also being taken apart, and we can move on to that one, which is in the blast room in here. This was delivered on, what day was this brought out? On Saturday. This was brought on Saturday. This was brought at the weekend. This has been stripped down. This was delivered to us as a partially stripped rolling shell. The chap that supplied this to us had already removed all the external panel work because he buys and sells parts for these. He's actually fairly well known in the Integra world. So he supplied this as a rolling shell to us, which was ideal because obviously then we're not buying the bits we don't need. He's actually had the spare parts from the first car from us as well, so that he's got those available for sale as well then. So hopefully the dying cars will keep a few more on the road as well. So yeah, we've stripped this down, got all the parts off this. This is now into the blast room. I'll go on to that slightly more in a second. But the reason for doing this is so that we can start the build of the second car while all of the structural parts are fresh in everybody's minds. Because doing these one-off, or in this case two-off vehicles, it's very often the case that it simply isn't worth drawing every single component that goes into those cars. The time just is not justifiable to draw all those parts. So they're kind of made to suit the situation on the car at the time. And what Scott's done and Bobby has done while they're making the parts for that car is generally they've made 2 of each part as they've gone, so that we've got one for the second car. But there's quite a lot that's just constrained to memory at the time. And really, the sooner you can get onto building the second one, the better, in terms of everything being fresh in your mind of exactly how you went about doing the various operations. And given that we already have the second Allegro in storage, and we've now got the second Integra, I feel that it makes sense to get the second one, start building that on the jig, get that underway, and get the fabrication done on it soon while everything's fresh in everybody's minds, and we don't lose too much time reworking things, reworking out how we'd actually done things. So back to Integra, all stripped down, all the parts are stored, all the parts that we need are all stored, ready to use. And that also, as I say again, also means we can actually also start reworking and refurbishing the parts, all of the underpinnings that we're actually going to be reusing. We can start reworking all of those ready as well, ready for the assembly process later on. But the Integra itself is now in here. Rich started blasting this lasting yesterday. We wouldn't normally split a blasting process across days because you can have some flash corrosion, particularly on with the weather yesterday. It was incredibly humid, so surface corrosion can be quite an issue. It was a bit of a mare of a day yesterday. I had various problems, one of which was the dryer, or just to compound the issue, given that it was a really damp day, was the dryer on the blasting setup keeling over. On that subject, I figured it might be quite good to just cover a few bits. I'll step over here so I'm kind of in the right place in Jamie's frame. But I thought it might be worth just covering a few bits of the blasting process, because we refer to blasting quite a bit. We've done a little bit on it on an autofocus episode, but I know there'll be quite a few people watching this that probably haven't seen the autofocus episode, so I will just mention a little bit about the process. This is our blast room, looking a bit worn, but it's done about 10 years work I think now, so it's going to look a little bit worn, but it's doing pretty well really. So this is the space that we do our blasting operations in. There's a big fan up there which sucks air in above the doors at this end. It pulls the air in over the doors, so it rolls down, pulls through, clears the dust, goes through into that trough at the back. There's a water screen that operates in that trough at the back. That's all rubber lined. There's a water screen in there where there's 2 layers of water droplets that basically pour down and catch the dust in there, and then that's drawn out through an extract system up through a chimney and out of the building. And that's done on a recirculating system of the water. There's a settling tank, and then a filter screen, a dirt screen, and then a catch tank with a recirculation pump that's basically a sewage pump that circulates the water around in that. So that catches the dust out of the air that's being pulled through the blast room. So that keeps it so it's possible to see in here. We've stuck a couple more lights in here recently just so you can see a little bit better, because visibility is a bit of a challenge in here. And then the blasting setup itself, on the floor you can see it because I'm stood on it, but we use crushed glass. This is a pretty common solution. Most people that I know in the blasting world that blast automotive type, this type of job, use crushed glass. It's very, very good in terms of the dust is as harmless as dust can get. If you use, people talk about sand blasting. If you use sand, it has free silica in it. It has free crystalline silica in it, which is extremely dangerous, gives you silicosis and kills you. So that's pretty dangerous to use. So you don't use sand. It's actually not legal to use sand either. So it's just a no-no. So we use crushed glass. We've tried various other media, and I know of people using other media, but crushed glass has the right combination of enough weight to cut well, enough sharpness to cut well, but not so much weight that it adds to distortion problems, and it's very inert. It doesn't cause residual issues. It doesn't embed in, if it does, it doesn't embed in the surface, but if it did embed in the surface, it's benign, whereas various other blasting media, if it embeds in the surface, can cause you other problems. That's all an aside. So we use crushed glass. Blast pot is here. It's a pressure pot. I think it's I can't even remember the make of it now. Hog. It's a hog pot, which is it's basically the same. The UK sort of manufacturer of most blasting gear is Hodge Clemco. All of the bits bolted to this are Clemco parts, really, but the pot was actually made by Hog. It's a pressure pot. Basically, you pour grit in at the top. It goes down a hole in the top. There's a valve in there, which is actually looking extremely worn looking at it. There's a pop-up valve in there, a big mushroom-shaped pop-up valve that pops up each time you go to start blasting. That will pop up, seal against an O-ring underneath the top here. Seal the pot up. That pressurizes the grit and forces the grit down through the funnel at the bottom, through the grit flow adjusting valve, and into a venturi where it deposits it into a fast moving stream of air that is also provided by the air compressor, which I'll show you in a minute, and that blows that air and grit mixture down this blast hose, which is a thick rubber lined reinforced hose, all the way down there, blows it all the way down the hose and blows it out of the nozzle. The nozzle is tungsten carbide inside there. It's a tungsten carbide nozzle, 1/4 inch bore with a nylon jacket on it, which just protects it, stops it getting smashed. And then on the end of here you have the thing we'd call the dead man's handle. It's a handle with a rubber button on it, shuts the hole off on there. When that shuts off, that pressurizes up these two lines that come down here. That shuts, that operates a valve on the back of the pot there called the dead man valve, which is what starts and stops the air supply to the pot and to the blast hose. So basically it completely stops the pot operation and restarts it. The air for this lot is fed by a diesel engine compressor outside. I won't bother boring you with that, but there's a diesel-powered 50 horsepower diesel engine compressor that we use. We don't have enough electrical power on site to operate the blast setup by using electricity for the air compressor, because the air compressor needs to be pretty enormous. So it's a 50 horsepower diesel air compressor that we have outside, a very old 1970s Hydrovane one, but it actually seems to be very, very good. It needs the odd bit of maintenance, but it's pretty good. We don't do enough blasting to justify spending enormous sums of money on a compressor, so it's we only probably blast once a month, twice a month maybe. So that sits out there, and that supplies the air into the building via that yellow air line that you can see there, and that goes via above my head on the mezzanine. There is a compressed air dryer, single phase refrigerant dryer that takes the moisture out of the air. And also above my head, above this chute here, there is a hopper of another bit of my own construction. There's lots of bits of self-constructed stuff on this setup, but there is what's actually an old fertiliser spreader, old farm fertiliser spreader hopper, with an air cylinder on the bottom with an air-operated shutter that I built onto the bottom of it. This little lever on the wall here operates the air lines that open and close that shutter. That means that once you're wearing this hat, which is what you would be wearing when you're blasting in here, this is an air-fed helmet. This is fed with pressurised air, so you get to breathe clean air, and it pushes any dust outwards, so there's no way dust can get into your breathing space because there's pressurised air fed around your head. When you're wearing that, it's quite hard to coordinate things. You've got that and gloves on, and obviously you're sort of togged up ready for blasting. Fine control of things is difficult. There's a big lever on the wall there. You just operate that lever up and down. Up is off, down is on. Opens the shutter up there using air pressure, and that refeeds the pot from the hopper above. When we've finished all our blasting work, we clear up, sweep all the grit into a big pile in here, shovel it up, and we actually put it through another bit of homemade kit. I remember there was a question a while back, somebody asking about something more about this. This is a homemade screen deck, again looking a bit well worn because again it's done about 10 years work now. But I built this. We were trying to work out a solution for recycling the grit, not so much because of the cost of the grit, the glass, because the glass is fairly cheap. The problem is the amount of waste material you generate. Anything that you don't recycle obviously has to be got rid of, which costs money. So the simple solution is reuse as much of it as you possibly can. But obviously you need to take out any big lumps, usually bits of car, and you need to take out any really fine glass dust because it causes the abrasive to clump and stops it feeding in the pot. And this does that. It's basically a vibrating motor, screens mounted on some rubber bobbins, so you can see that will move and shake. That shakes the whole screen. Course, I can't even remember the mesh sizes now, it was so long ago since I did it, but coarse mesh on top, very fine mesh underneath, which Rich has just put some chains on just to try and distribute the media a bit more evenly on it, and also just to try and knock on that, the glass tends to get stuck in the mesh and block it, so he's put that on just to try and unblock the mesh a little bit. We'll see how well that works. And then a hopper on top, and basically we shovel all the blasting grit up, shovel it into there, fetch the hopper down from on top, stick that under there, shovel the grit into there. This screens out all the good stuff. The good stuff comes off there, goes back into the hopper, refill the hopper, top it up with fresh grit from a 1 ton bag of new grit. Then once the hopper's full, back up there with the forklift, plug the airlines back into it, and you're ready to go again. It's a pretty slick system as far as you can get without having a self-clearing floor like the guys who are blasting every day will have a self-clearing floor and a grit recovery system in the floor, but that's a bit beyond what we can justify for the amount of blasting we do. But it's generally a pretty slick system. I think that's given a reasonable whistle-stop tour of the blasting operation. They'll be firing up again later on. And then that kind of neatly ties me into the next bit I'll mention, which is the Project Cooma, the second Mark 1 Escort, which is now in the body shop. Later this morning, that will be getting epoxy coating. That was blasted and zinc metal sprayed yesterday. The outer body surfaces are just being DA'd now. They're being sanded, so we don't like to do a final blast on the outer surfaces. We prefer to DA sand those. So that's being sanded in the body prep area now, and then that will be coming into the paint booth for its epoxy coating. As I say, the zinc metal spray system is literally just sat there. That was being used yesterday, following blasting, to get the zinc spray on the underside of the Project Cooma Escort. Once that's got the epoxy coating on it later today, then tomorrow that'll be start on body prep. Obviously, we've also got to do the cleaning off. We've got to do the wrap we've got to clean off the weld lines for the front wings, wrap to the underside of the front wings, and wrap to the covered sections of the inner wings on the front, so that then we can do the final welds, welding the outer front wings onto that car, and then that's completely into the hands of the body shop to get prepared for paint. And then finally, keep gesticulating in this direction, we have the V12 E-type, Project Norman as we're calling it. And I think we've mentioned before about the rear end being redone in carbon fibre on this. The front is already being done in carbon fibre, so we've got the centre tub to deal with. We're dealing with the rust repair on the centre tub. We've made a start on the floors on that, but we've then discovered that whilst they're okay, the outer sills are not perfect. We were planning on some at least rudimentary level of jigging of this shell anyway, to at least get it on a level surface so that we could align the carbon fibre work front and rear. Now we've made the decision to replace the outer sills as well, which has brought forward the agenda of getting this body onto the jig. So we've brought one of the two Selettes that we moved outside back into the building. Bobby and Sam are getting that levelled up right now. With the end extensions on it, so that we've got jig past both ends of the shell with the bonnet on. We've got jig far enough fore, far enough aft, that we've got the ability to level the carbon bodywork front and rear once we've done the tub, without having to move the car on the jig, because we're going to fixture the body tub down onto the jig so that we've got everything rigidly located on there when we go to replace the outer sills. Just as a precaution, we don't think anything's going to go anywhere, but at least with it all rigidly located on the select jig, it can't go anywhere. So that job's kind of grown and changed agenda very slightly with the decision to replace the outer sills. But it was going to need to go onto the Select at some point to give us a level surface to work from, to get the carbon front and rear sections dealt with. So that's what's happening there. And I think that pretty much rounds up everything that's going on in the metalwork, fabrication and body side of things at the moment. And the other thing would be that the Peugeot 309 is now in its final, the body shell anyway, if not the panels. The body shell is now painted as well, but you'll see that probably next door with Cal in a moment. So on that note, I shall hand over to Cal in assembly.
Well, thank you very much, Nat. I am starting by doing retro power blasphemy and neither drinking Roundstone coffee nor drinking it out of a retro power mug. But there we go. Follow me. It's a bit crammed in here. I've got to like wend my way through here, mainly because my 309, which a few people showed an interest in actually, is lurking over there, having freshly been painted by Gaz and the crew, Mark and Steve. And it's looking, it's always the way. When the pressure's really on, you can probably nitpick, defects in paint jobs. When it's total relaxation, and I've said, don't worry about it too much. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's come out probably one of the most perfect looking paint jobs out of the gun I've seen him do. So looking really cool. I'm excited about that. And then next to it, the Volvo. In fact, I will just squeeze this way. We're in a bit of a rush today, so I haven't really planned the route around the workshop at all. Volvo, Anthony was doing the sound system on this, which is now finished. So just wanted something decent. It's got that Blaupunkt kind of retro 90s looking Frankfurt, I think, his head unit in it. And we've done in all the factory locations, Alpine, I think 13-inch speakers, well no, 13 inch. That'd be good. 13-inch speakers in the doors, that'd be good going. 13 centimetre speakers in the rear doors, 18 centimetre speakers in the front doors. Because they're quite small speakers in the factory locations, we've done an Alpine, just a small 8-inch sub in a box with an amplifier in the boot, which sounds spot on, so happy with that. And then we MOT'd this at the beginning of this week. And then the last thing, James is just working on, the owner's quite a tall chap, so always has problems with seats going far enough back, and this is no exception. So we're just doing an extended seat runner set that gives him 4 inches more rearward travel on the seat. Basically, the front seat can touch the back seat now. So we've just tested them, taken them out to paint them, and that will be ready to go back to be detailed, I think, and then go into storage until such time as the chap can use it. If we squeeze around here, look, Land Cruiser. Gibbo's been on with just putting up the door cards, little last finishing touches really, got the door cards fitted. I was just waiting for Dean, who was over end of last week, where the join was, the seam between the upper and lower parts of the door card. It just had a little bit too much material where it wrapped around the card, and it was holding the card off the door panel just very slightly. So we've just got him to just skide a little bit of the leather away from that. So it just sits a bit flusher. Now that's done, Gibbo's put the handles in, put the winder handles in, put the little bezels around the door release handles, so that's done now. And I think the only thing I'm waiting on the interior on this is the diff lock button, which Bruce is just engraving at the minute, and then that's done on the inside. So I reckon I'll be getting miles on this very shortly. I reckon you could squeeze through here, Jamie. Hopefully, follow me this way. So Morris, Gibbo's been on with the vacuum tank. We talked about the fact that we're tackling this slight oddity in the way the brake pedal feels. It feels like the vacuum assistance has a slight delay on it. And it's got a remote servo, which is at the back. And we were wondering whether having a vacuum reservoir near the servo might improve that. So at the moment, Gibbo's just made up a stainless steel vacuum reservoir, tucks up in front of the subframe here. Just buttoning up the last details on that, and I'll be able to test that next week. So fingers crossed that is that sorted. Dean dropped off the visors for this, so I've just got to fit those. And I'm waiting on the laser engraved bits from Bruce again for the little caps in the engine bay, which I think I talked about last week. Utah, I mentioned last week, had a bit of a fluctuation on the oil pressure gauge, which I suspected was instrumentation, and it is. Really simple one, it's just a failed oil pressure sender. I just got a resistor, it's a 0 to 240 ohm sender. So I just got a 100 ohm resistor, and I tried it near the multi-plug that feeds the gauge, and it put the gauge in the middle. So I tried it actually disconnected the sender and put it between the sender wire and ground, and it put the gauge in the middle. So conclusively sender. So I'm just waiting for a replacement oil pressure sender on that. and that will be ready to go again. And then the Camaro, a couple of things on this. Ant's just buttoning up the last details on the grille, so we can get the surrounds for that sent for anodising. And then the design guys have been on it with a couple of things. I showed the drawings, I think last week or the week before, for the caps in the engine bay, the coolant top-up cap and the power steering fluid cap. Andy's now machined those and they're back and just trial fitted at the minute, ready for anodising. So they'll go for anodising with the grille bits. And then Tarks has been carrying on with the centre console design, which we're pretty much there with now. Intention with that is we're basically machining the whole of the surround part of it from a high density foam, which we'll then leather. And then there'll be a machined billet sort of central panel to that, which has an audio controller in it and a cordless phone charger. So yeah, he's just in the latter stages of the design of that, and then we can get that tested before we get that machined properly. So all going in the right direction. And I think next thing on this, probably next week, we're going to get this in the air and James is going to start the exhaust system fabrication on it. And I think between the exhaust system and the wiring loom, which is being made by Speartech, that will probably get us in a point to actually be able to fire it up, which is rather an exciting prospect. I think at that point, I'm going to call it a day. I'm actually heading to Le Mans for the Classic first thing tomorrow morning. And Jamie, who's behind the camera, is off next week. So I'm going to attempt, although this might go terribly wrong, to actually film a Le Mans episode and edit it myself next week, which I may well not have time to do, but let's see. Watch this space for a week's time from now. And hopefully see you then. Boom. That's a wrap.